The woman locked up as if something were tearing her from the inside. The lamp's flame bent toward the empty chair, the air turned icy, and her body, possessed for 17 years, began to shake when a 6-year-old's voice recited, Kul huwa Allahu ahad. What had resisted doctors, seasoned sheikhs, and endless Ruqyah sessions, in that instant, wept, not from physical pain, but from the inability to withstand a purity, with no cracks to corrupt. If you believe, you'll recognize a sign. If you're skeptical, watch how a child's honesty disarms a terror that technique could never touch. In Fez, Morocco, a single verse changed the ending no one thought possible, and what the Jinn revealed before departing left the village silent for days. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and leave a comment telling us which country you're watching from. Your engagement helps us share more stories like this one that bridge our world with the unseen. Now let me take you back to where this impossible story began, to a village outside Fez, Morocco, where the heat shimmers off ancient walls and the call to prayer echoes 5 times daily through narrow streets that have witnessed 1,000 years of secrets. Her name was Salma, and for 17 years she had not been herself. It started when she was 19, a bright university student in Rabat studying economics, engaged to a kind man from a good family. Her whole life stretched before her like an unwritten book. Then came the camping trip to the Atlas Mountains with her cousins. They found the abandoned shrine half buried in the hillside. Local Berber legends warned never to enter, never to disturb what slept there. Salma entered anyway. She was modern, educated, dismissive of superstitious village talk. She found a small brass lamp inside, tarnished with age, covered in Arabic script she couldn't read. She picked it up. She felt a cold wind that shouldn't exist underground. She heard her name whispered in a voice that sounded like water flowing over rocks. Then she fainted. When she woke up, her cousins were shaking her, terrified. She had been unconscious for 3 hours. They carried her down the mountain, and that night Salma started screaming in her sleep, in languages she had never learned. Classical Arabic, ancient Berber dialects, something that sounded like Aramaic. Her family brought her to doctors. The doctors found nothing. They brought her to psychiatrists. The psychiatrists diagnosed psychosis, prescribed medications that made her worse. They finally brought her to a local sheikh who performed Ruqyah. The sheikh lasted 10 minutes before he fled the room, pale and shaking, refusing to speak about what he had seen. 5 more sheikhs tried over the years. 2 refused to continue. 3 completed the sessions, but achieved nothing. The Jinn inside Salma was too strong, too ancient, too clever. It would hide during the recitations, then emerge when everyone left, mocking them through her voice. Salma's engagement was broken. Her fiancé's family whispered that she was cursed, touched by evil. Her university career ended. Her friends stopped visiting. By the time she turned 36, she lived as a ghost in her parents' house, sometimes herself, sometimes something else entirely wearing her face. Her mother, Fatima, never stopped praying, never stopped searching for someone who could help. And then she heard about Sheikh Hassan. Sheikh Hassan was not like the others. He was 73 years old, had spent 50 years studying the Quran, had performed Ruqyah in 7 countries, and had never, not once, failed to help someone truly possessed. He lived simply in a small house near the Qarawiyyin Mosque in Fez, one of the oldest universities in the world. People came from across North Africa seeking his help. He charged nothing. He accepted no fame. He simply served. When Fatima finally reached him after months of waiting, he listened to Salma's story without interruption. His eyes, deep-set and wise, showed no surprise, no fear. He had heard worse. He had faced worse. "Bring her to me on Friday, after Jumu'ah prayer," he said quietly, "and bring your granddaughter." Fatima was confused. "My granddaughter? But she's only 6 years old. This is not something for a child to witness." "Trust me," Sheikh Hassan interrupted gently. "Bring little Amina. She is the reason I will help your daughter." Fatima didn't understand, but she had learned long ago that true wisdom often sounds like riddles until the moment of revelation. That Friday, after the congregational prayer, Fatima arrived at Sheikh Hassan's house with Salma and little Amina. Salma had been calm that morning, suspiciously calm. Whatever lived inside her knew something was different about this visit. Sheikh Hassan's home was sparse but beautiful. Cream-colored walls, geometric Zeliga tilework, a simple carpet oriented toward Mecca. Sunlight filtered through the mashrabiyah screens, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to shift like living things. "Sit," the sheikh said, gesturing to cushions arranged in a circle. His voice was kind but carried an authority that made even the jinn inside Salma hesitate. Amina clutched her grandmother's hand. She was a small girl, all dark eyes and serious expression, wearing a simple pink dress. She had been told only that they were visiting a kind old man who would help Auntie Salma feel better. Sheikh Hassan studied the child for a long moment, then smiled, a smile of recognition that Fatima would only understand later. "Tell me, little Amina," he said softly, kneeling to her level. "Do you know any surahs from the Quran?" Amina nodded shyly. "I know Al-Fatiha and Al-Ikhlas and some of Al-Baqarah. Mama teaches me every night." "Beautiful," the sheikh said. "Allah has blessed you with a pure heart. Would you like to help your Auntie Salma today?" The child looked at her aunt, who sat unnaturally still, her eyes distant and dark. "Yes," Amina whispered. "I want to help." What happened next would become legend in that part of Fez, whispered in tea houses, shared in Friday sermons, passed down as proof that Allah's mercy works in ways that shatter human understanding. Sheikh Hassan began the Ruqyah with Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 255-257, Ayat al-Kursi, the throne verse, one of the most powerful protections against evil. Allahu la ilaha illa huwa, al-hayyul qayyum. Salma's body went rigid immediately, her hands clenched into claws, her head tilted at an angle that looked wrong, inhuman, but her eyes went completely black, not the iris, not the pupil, but the entire eye, like staring into empty wells. "Are you again, old man?" The voice that came from Salma's mouth was not hers. It was male, ancient, layered with harmonics that made the air feel thick. "How many of you fools must I endure?" Sheikh Hassan continued reciting, his voice steady, powerful. He had heard such blasphemy before. The jinn laughed, a sound like glass breaking under water. "I have lived in this flesh for 17 years. 17. Do you know how many of your kind have tried to remove me? 12 sheikhs. 12 failures. What makes you think you're different?" The sheikh's voice grew louder, more forceful. Salma's body began to convulse. Her mother grabbed Amina, trying to shield the child's eyes, but Sheikh Hassan raised his hand. "Let her watch," he commanded. "She needs to see." "See what?" the jinn snarled. "See you fail like all the others? I am Malik ibn Iblis. I am 3,000 years old. I was alive when these mountains were young. Your pathetic recitations are nothing but—" The jinn stopped mid-sentence. Its black eyes had fixed on little Amina. The child was staring back, not with fear, but with a curiosity so innocent, so pure, it seemed to create a light that no one could see but everyone could feel. "What is that?" the jinn whispered, and for the first time there was something in its voice that wasn't arrogance. It was unease. Sheikh Hassan saw the shift. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he had brought the child for. "Amina," he said gently, "would you like to recite something for your auntie?" The little girl nodded. She stepped forward, small hand still in her grandmother's, and in a voice as clear and pure as mountain water, she began to recite. Kul huwa Allahu ahad. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. Salma's body lurched backward as if struck by invisible lightning. The jinn inside her screamed, not the theatrical screaming of horror movies, but a sound of genuine agony, raw and primal, like something being burned from the inside out. "Stop her!" it shrieked. "Make her stop!" But Amina continued, her small voice unwavering. Allahu Samad, Lam Yalid wa Lam Yulad, wa Lam Yakun Lahu Kufuwan Ahad. The room's temperature dropped so suddenly that their breath became visible. The sunlight coming through the screens dimmed, as if something invisible was blocking it. The geometric patterns on the walls seemed to writhe and pulse. Fatima pulled Amina closer, terrified, but the child showed no fear. She simply looked at her aunt with eyes full of love and concern and continued reciting. Sheikh Hassan had performed hundreds of Ruqyah sessions. He had seen jinn resist the most powerful sheikhs, the most learned scholars, men who had memorized the entire Quran and studied for decades. But he had never seen a jinn react like this to a child's recitation. The entity was panicking. "She's hurting me," it wailed through Salma's mouth. "How is she hurting me? She's just a child. She doesn't even understand what she's saying." "That's exactly why it's working," Sheikh Hassan said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. The jinn's black eyes were now leaking something that looked like smoke. dark, oily vapor that dissipated the moment it touched the air. Its voice became desperate, pleading, "Please, make her stop. I'll leave. I'll go. Just make her stop reciting." But something strange was happening to Amina too. As she recited, her small face had taken on an expression of profound peace, the kind of serenity you see on the faces of those deep in prayer, completely surrendered to the divine. She was no longer just a child reciting verses. She had become a channel for something far greater than herself. The grandmother noticed it first. "Hassan," Fatima whispered, her voice shaking, "look at her hands." Everyone turned to look at little Amina's hands. They were glowing. Not with physical light, there was no illumination you could point a camera at, but with something that existed in a different spectrum, visible only to those present in that moment. A light that touched the soul before it touched the eyes. "Ya Allah," Sheikh Hassan breathed. "I've read about this in the ancient texts, but I never thought I'd witness it. The light of fitra, the pure, untainted natural disposition every child is born with before the world corrupts them." The Jinn was now sobbing openly through Salma's body. I can't bear it. The purity, it's like acid on my essence. Please, please." For the first time in 17 years, through the tears and the pain and the supernatural horror, Salma's real voice emerged. Small, broken, barely audible beneath the Jinn's wailing. "Help me." Sheikh Hassan made a decision in that moment that changed everything. He raised his hand, signaling Amina to pause. The child stopped reciting and looked at him with those impossibly clear eyes, waiting. "Malik ibn Iblis," the sheikh said, addressing the Jinn directly by the name it had given. "You claim to be 3,000 years old. You claim to have resisted the recitations of learned scholars, experienced sheikhs, masters of Ruqyah. Yet this 6-year-old child, who barely understands the meanings of what she recites, has brought you to tears in minutes. Explain this to me." The Jinn was silent for a long moment. When it finally spoke, its voice was different, stripped of arrogance, raw, with something that sounded almost like honesty. "Do you want to know the truth, old man? The truth that we Jinn know but you humans have forgotten?" "Speak," Sheikh Hassan commanded. "You're learned scholars. They recite with their minds. Years of study, memorization, understanding of grammar and tafsir. Their recitations are technically perfect, but their hearts..." The Jinn's voice became a whisper. "Their hearts carry the weight of the world, pride in their knowledge, ego in their spiritual achievements, doubt, frustration, attachment to outcome. When they recite, I feel their words, yes, but I also feel their inner noise, and in that noise I find cracks where I can hide." Salma's mother gasped softly, but Sheikh Hassan gestured for silence. "Continue." "But this child, when she recites, there is nothing but the words themselves. No ego, no pride, no doubt, no worldly attachment. She is like a clear glass through which divine light passes undistorted. When her recitation touches me, there is nowhere to hide. No cracks, no shadows, only the pure, unfiltered word of Allah carried in a vessel of absolute innocence." The sheikh nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Every child is born in a state of fitra, natural purity. You are experiencing the original spiritual state of humanity before it becomes corrupted by dunya. It's agony," the Jinn admitted, "like being touched by holy fire. I cannot bear it. I will leave this woman. I will go. Just don't make the child recite again, please." Sheikh Hassan looked at Fatima, then at little Amina, who was watching this exchange with wide, fascinated eyes. The child had no idea she was witnessing something that would be discussed in Islamic scholarly circles for generations to come. "You will leave," the sheikh agreed, "but first you will answer my questions, and you will tell the truth, or the child will recite again, and this time she will not stop." The threat worked. The Jinn shuddered violently. "Ask, why did you possess this woman? Why 17 years? What do you gain from this suffering?" Another long silence. Then, "I didn't choose her. She disturbed my dwelling place. The shrine in the Atlas Mountains, that was my home, had been for 800 years. She entered without permission, touched what was mine, broke the seals without knowing what she was doing. The ancient laws of our realm say that when a human violates our sanctuary, we have the right to claim them. So I did. And in 17 years, has your anger not diminished? Has revenge satisfied you?" "There is no satisfaction in revenge," the Jinn said quietly. "Only the empty passage of time. If I'm being honest, and that child's presence compels honesty, I have been trapped as much as she has, bound to this flesh, unable to return to my true form, unable to live among my own kind. I have been in prison just as much as she has. This revelation stunned everyone. The monster that had tormented Salma for 17 years was admitting it was suffering too. Then why not leave before now? Fatima demanded, her voice breaking. Why torture my daughter if you've been miserable too? Pride, the Jinn answered simply, the same sin that cast Iblis from paradise. I could not admit I had made a mistake, could not admit that possessing her served no purpose but my own ego. Every time a sheikh tried to cast me out, my pride made me resist, made me prove I was stronger than their recitations. But this child, its voice became almost wondering. She doesn't fight with strength, she doesn't try to overpower me. She simply is, and her being is so pure that my impurity cannot exist in its presence. Sheikh Hassan looked at Amina with profound respect. Out of the mouths of children, he whispered, quoting the biblical phrase that Islam also honors. Little one, will you recite one more time? For your auntie, to help her come home. Amina nodded seriously. Should I recite the same surah? No, the sheikh said. This time, recite Ayat al-Kursi. But before you start, I want you to think about how much you love your Auntie Salma. Think about wanting her to be happy and free. Can you do that? Yes, the child said simply. I love Auntie. What happened next would become the moment that everyone present would remember until their dying day. Amina closed her eyes, her small hands folded over her chest, and when she began to recite, her voice carried not just words, but an emotion so pure, so powerful, that it transcended language itself. Allahu la ilaha illa huwa. This time the Jinn didn't scream. It didn't resist, it didn't fight. It simply began to cry. Not through Salma's voice. This was different. Everyone in the room could hear it. A weeping that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. A sound of grief so ancient and profound that it made their own eyes fill with tears in response. Al-Hayyul Qayyum. The black smoke that had been leaking from Salma's eyes intensified, but now it looked different. Less like darkness and more like release, like poison, leaving a wound. La ta'khudhuhu sinatun wala nawm. I see it now, the Jinn whispered, its voice overlapping with Amina's recitation. I see what I've lost, what we all lost when we chose pride over obedience. She has what I can never have again, that direct connection to the divine, unfiltered by ego, unobstructed by sin. Even we Jinn, created from smokeless fire, created before humans, even we were born with this, and we lost it. We traded it for our own importance. And this child, this small, powerless child, has something more precious than all my centuries of existence. Amina continued, her voice growing stronger. Lahu ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard. The smoke was pouring out now, coalescing into a visible form that hovered above Salma's body, vaguely humanoid but shifting, translucent, made of shadow and regret. For the first time, they could see the Jinn as it truly was. Not a monster, not a demon, but a being of intelligence and emotion, capable of suffering, capable of wrong, capable, possibly, of remorse. Man dalladhi yashfa'u indahu illa bi'idhnih. I'm sorry, the Jinn said, and the words sounded like they were being torn from somewhere deep within its essence. For what that's worth, I'm sorry for taking 17 years of her life. I'm sorry for the pain I caused her family. I thought I was justified. I thought I was exercising my rights. But this child has shown me... Its voice broke. The shadow form rippled like water disturbed by rain. She has shown me that power without mercy is just another form of weakness. And I have been so weak. Sheikh Hassan was weeping now too. In 50 years of Ruqyah, he had never heard a Jinn express genuine remorse. They bargained, they threatened, they pleaded, they lied. But true repentance, never. Amina completed the verse. وَلَا يَعُودُهُ حِفْظُهُمَا وَهُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. The shadow form began to dissolve, breaking apart into wisps that faded like morning mist in sunlight. But before it disappeared completely, it spoke one last time. Not to the sheikh, not to Fatima, but to the child. Little one, never let the world steal what you have. Guard your fitra like the treasure it is. And when you're old enough to understand what happened here today, remember that even those who seem irredeemably lost can be moved by purity. You saved me as much as you saved her. Then it was gone. Salma collapsed. The sudden absence of the entity that had occupied her body for 17 years left a vacuum, and her consciousness rushed to fill it like air into deflated lungs. She gasped, her eyes, now brown again, fully brown, beautifully human, flying open in confusion and terror. Where am I? How did I— Mother? Fatima fell to her knees beside her daughter, sobbing so hard she couldn't speak, could only hold Salma's face in her hands and stare at eyes that were finally her daughter's own. "You're here," Fatima managed to choke out. "You're back. You're really back." Amina, exhausted by something she didn't fully understand, swayed on her feet. Sheikh Hassan caught her gently, lifting the child into his arms. She nestled against his shoulder, suddenly just a tired 6-year-old who wanted a nap. "Did I help, Auntie?" she asked sleepily. "You did more than help, little one," the sheikh said softly. "You performed a miracle." But as the initial shock and joy subsided, a difficult reality emerged. Salma, conscious for the first time in 17 years, had no memory of those years. They were a blank void. She remembered entering the shrine as a 19-year-old university student. She remembered picking up the lamp. She remembered the cold wind. And then, nothing, until now. "Mother," she said, her voice breaking, "how old am I? What year is it?" Fatima hesitated, her joy cracking at the edges. "You're 36, Habibti. It's 2024. The numbers didn't make sense in Salma's mind. The last thing she remembered was 2007. She had lost 17 years. 17 years of her life simply gone. "My engagement?" she asked, though something in her already knew the answer. "Ended long ago." "My degree?" "Never finished." "My friends?" Silence. Salma began to shake. The freedom she'd just gained was colliding with the reality of what that freedom revealed. A life stolen, opportunities lost, youth consumed. While the Jinn had worn her like a garment, the world had moved on without her. "I'm 36 years old," she whispered, as if testing the words, trying to make them real. "I'm 36, and I've lived none of it." This was the test that Sheikh Hassan had known would come, the moment when mercy reveals its cost. Yes, Salma was free, but freedom from possession didn't mean freedom from grief. The Jinn had left, but the consequences of its occupation remained. "How do I come back from this?" Salma asked, looking at the sheikh with eyes that had seen only darkness for so long, they had forgotten how to find light. "How do I rebuild a life when half of it has been stolen?" Sheikh Hassan set Amina down gently in her grandmother's arms and sat across from Salma. His old face was kind but honest. "I won't lie to you, daughter. It will be hard. The world has changed in 17 years. Technology has advanced. People have moved on. You will have to grieve what you lost while simultaneously learning to live again. But," he leaned forward, "you have something that many people spend their entire lives searching for." "What?" Salma asked bitterly. "What could I possibly have?" "You have been to the edge of despair and returned. You have been imprisoned by darkness and set free by light. You know, more deeply than most humans will ever know, that the spiritual realm is real, that evil is real, that mercy is real, and that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places." He gestured to Amina, now dozing in her grandmother's lap, "from the pure heart of a child." Salma looked at her young niece, the child she didn't remember ever meeting, who had somehow saved her with nothing but innocence and words. "I don't even know her," Salma said, tears streaming down her face. "She freed me, and I don't even know her name." "Her name is Amina," Fatima said softly. "She's your brother's daughter, and she's been praying for you since she was old enough to understand prayer. She used to ask me every day, 'When will Auntie Salma get better?' And I would tell her, 'When Allah wills it.' And today," her voice broke with wonder, "today, Allah willed it through her." The test was this: could Salma find meaning in suffering? Could she rebuild not just a life, but a soul? Could she transform trauma into testimony? That night would be long, the processing longer still. But in that moment, holding her mother's hand and looking at the sleeping child who had been her unlikely savior, Salma made a choice. She chose to see the mercy within the trial. 3 days after the Ruqyah, Salma sat in Sheikh Hassan's courtyard, surrounded by the ancient walls of Fez that had witnessed centuries of human story and struggle. The call to Maghrib prayer echoed across the city, and she listened to it as if hearing it for the first time. In a way, she was. "Sheikh," she said quietly, "I need to understand something. That Jinn, Malik, he said he was sorry, he expressed remorse. I've been taught that Jinn are fundamentally evil, that Shaitan and his followers have no capacity for repentance. But what I heard in that room..." She paused, struggling with concepts that challenged everything she'd learned in her years of Islamic studies before the possession. What I heard sounded genuine. Was it manipulation, or can Jinn truly feel regret? Sheikh Hassan poured mint tea with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who has learned that rushing wisdom ruins it. This is the question, isn't it? The question that few scholars want to address because the answer is uncomfortable. He handed her a glass, the sweet aroma of mint rising in the cooling evening air. The Quran tells us that among the Jinn are believers and disbelievers, the righteous and the wicked. Surah al-Jinn makes this explicit. They are not a monolithic force of evil. They are like humans, beings with choice, with moral agency, which means, he met her eyes, which means they can change. But Iblis made his choice and sealed it with arrogance, the Sheikh interrupted gently. But not all who follow him are irredeemable. Some follow out of anger or pain or, like Malik, pride that has not yet hardened into permanent rebellion. And when confronted with something that cuts through that pride, like a child's pure recitation, Salma finished. Exactly. When confronted with undeniable evidence of divine truth, manifested through absolute innocence, even a Jinn can be moved. Not all will repent. Perhaps most won't. But some, he sipped his tea thoughtfully, some are waiting for permission to stop being what pain has made them. This was the real climax. Not the dramatic exit of the Jinn, but this quiet conversation about the nature of evil, redemption, and the possibility of change. Because if even a creature that had tormented her for 17 years could be moved to genuine remorse, what did that say about human potential for transformation? I want to meet her again, Salma said suddenly. Amina, I want to know the child who saved me, and I want to understand why her recitation worked when so many others failed. The mechanics are simple, Sheikh Hassan replied. Children haven't yet built the walls that adults construct around their hearts. They haven't learned to doubt, to question whether their small voices matter, to wonder if they're spiritually qualified enough. They just recite. And in that pure transmission, unobstructed by ego or anxiety, the words carry their full divine weight. So the secret to spiritual power is not trying so hard? The Sheikh smiled. The secret to spiritual power is remembering who you were before the world taught you to doubt your worth. Amina didn't defeat a Jinn because she's special. She did it because she hasn't yet learned that she's supposedly ordinary. That night, Salma made a decision that would define her new life. She would dedicate herself to teaching children. Not university students, not adults, but children. The young ones who still had that direct connection to the divine, who could recite with hearts uncluttered by the world's noise. If a 6-year-old could free her from 17 years of darkness, imagine what an entire generation of such children could do for the world. But first, she had to learn to live again herself. The real climax wasn't in the supernatural confrontation. It was in the choice to transform suffering into service, trauma into testimony, victimhood into purpose. 6 months after her liberation, Salma opened a small Quranic school in her mother's house. She called it Madrasat Amina, Amina's school, named for the child who had saved her life. The school was unlike any other in Fez. Salma didn't focus on rote memorization or grammatical precision. Instead, she taught children to recite with their hearts, not just their mouths, to understand that the words they spoke were not mere sounds, but vessels of divine power. When you say Bismillah, she would tell her students, you are not just saying words, you are inviting Allah into that moment, into that action. Feel the difference it makes. The children, ranging from ages 5 to 12, would practice with an awareness that other Quranic schools rarely taught, and the results were remarkable. Parents reported that their children's du'as, their personal prayers, seemed more answered than before. Teachers noted that the students had an unusual serenity about them, a centeredness that children typically don't possess. But the most profound consequence was in Salma herself. Teaching these children healed something in her that 17 years of possession had broken. With every small voice reciting Quran, with every innocent face concentrating on the Arabic script, she was remembering what it felt like to be connected to something greater than trauma. Little Amina, now 7 years old, came to the school every afternoon after her regular classes. She was no longer just Salma's savior. She had become Salma's student, and in many ways, her teacher. Auntie Salma, Amina asked one day, why do grown-ups forget how to pray like children? Salma paused, struck by the depth of the question. What do you mean, Habibti? When I pray, I just talk to Allah. I tell him about my day, about what I'm scared of, about what I'm happy about. But grown-ups use big words and sound like they're reading from a book. Why? Out of the mouths of children indeed, because we forget that Allah already knows everything, Salma said slowly, the realization dawning even as she spoke it. We think we have to impress him with our words, but he doesn't want impressive, he wants honest. Amina nodded seriously. That's what I think too. But the consequences weren't all beautiful. Salma still struggled. There were nights when she woke up gasping, convinced she was still trapped, still voiceless inside her own body. There were moments when she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the 36-year-old woman staring back, because in her mind, she was still 19. The years she'd lost didn't simply return because the Jinn had left. They were gone, truly, permanently gone. Her former classmates were now married with teenage children. Her ex-fiancé had married someone else and moved to France. The world had continued without her, and stepping back into it meant accepting that she could never reclaim what was taken. But she was learning something that her students taught her every day, that starting over isn't the same as starting late, that being behind doesn't mean being worthless. That loss can be transformed into wisdom if you're willing to do the painful work of transformation. Sheikh Hassan visited the school often, delighting in what Salma had built. You see, he would say, the Jinn took 17 years, but Allah is giving you something eternal. The souls of these children, shaped by your testimony. One afternoon, a mother brought her 12-year-old daughter to the school. The girl was troubled, the mother explained. She had nightmares. She felt watched. Strange things happened around her. Salma recognized the signs immediately. She had lived them. Bring her tomorrow, Salma said, and I will teach her something that can protect her better than any amulet, any spell, any protection ritual. I will teach her to recite like she means it. The consequence of being saved by a child's innocence was becoming someone who could save others by teaching them to reclaim their own. 2 years have passed since that Friday afternoon in Sheikh Hassan's home. Madrasat Amina has grown from 5 students to 50. Salma, now 38, has found not just purpose but peace. She will never get back the 17 years. They are gone, as permanent as death, as irreversible as time itself. But she has learned something that no traditional education could have taught her. That spiritual power doesn't come from years of study, from positions of religious authority, from age or gender or status. It comes from one thing only, the purity of the heart that calls upon Allah. A 6-year-old child defeated a 3,000-year-old Jinn, not through strength but through sincerity, not through knowledge but through innocence, not through trying to be powerful, but through not knowing she was supposed to be powerless. This is the lesson. In a world obsessed with qualifications, credentials, and proof of worthiness, Allah reminds us that He can work through anyone, the youngest, the smallest, the most overlooked. Last month, Sheikh Hassan passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75. His last words to Salma were, "Continue teaching them. Teach them that they don't need to be scholars to have spiritual impact. Teach them that purity of intention outweighs years of study. Teach them what Amina taught all of us." At his funeral, little Amina, now 8 years old, recited Surah Yasin over his grave. Her voice, still small and pure, carried across the cemetery, and everyone present felt what they had felt that day in the Ruqyah session, that sense of something divine passing through an unexpected vessel. The Jinn Malik ibn Iblis has not returned. Salma sometimes wonders where he went, whether he found peace, whether the remorse he expressed was genuine or tactical. She'll never know. But she chooses to believe in the possibility of his redemption, because if she doesn't believe that even the darkest beings can change, what hope is there for any of us? What happened in that room in Fez wasn't about jinn or demons or supernatural warfare. It was about something far simpler and far more profound, that Allah's mercy can work through anyone, and sometimes He chooses the least likely among us to perform the greatest miracles. Not to show us that they are special, but to remind us that none of us are ordinary. Every child who recites with sincerity is performing their own Ruqyah on the world, on themselves, on the unseen forces that feed on our doubt and fear. And every time an adult recaptures even a fraction of that childlike trust, that uncluttered faith, they too become channels for the divine. Salma teaches her students one final lesson, the one she learned the hard way. The Jinn who possessed me wasn't defeated by force. He was defeated by authenticity, by a heart so pure it couldn't coexist with corruption. And each of you has that same heart, not because you're special, but because that's how Allah made every human being. Your only job is to protect it from being covered by the dust of the world. If this story moved you, share it. Not because it's entertaining, but because somewhere someone is doubting their own spiritual worth. Someone thinks they're not religious enough, not knowledgeable enough, not worthy enough to approach Allah with their needs. And they need to hear about the 6-year-old who saved a life with 3 verses. Subscribe if you want more stories that reveal the hidden layers of faith, the moments when the impossible becomes inevitable, and the truth that power and purity are not opposites, but twins. And leave a comment. Have you ever witnessed faith manifesting through an unexpected person? Have you ever experienced something that defied explanation? Because this story isn't unique. Across the Muslim world, in countless unnamed villages and unreported moments, Allah is still working miracles through the most unexpected vessels. You just have to have the eyes to see them. Assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you. And may you never forget that in the kingdom of the heart, children are kings, innocence is armor, and the smallest voice can echo across realms that the greatest scholars will never reach.